Welcome to Sci-Fi Revenge Stories, where every story has a twist that will shock you to the core. Hit that subscribe button. Your one click means the world to me. The dampening field rolled over the valley like a heavy, invisible blanket. Instantly, the world died. The hum of the atmospheric scrubbers faded into nothing. The blue light of the perimeter shields winked out, leaving only the encroaching dark. Petra did not stop moving. She crouched low beneath the dense canopy, her boots making no sound on the forest floor. The sharp, organic scent of crushed pine needles mixed with the artificial stench of ozone from the fried plasma rifles scattered on the dirt. 2 miles east, the occupation force was marching through the wilderness preserve. They were entirely confident that humanity's fangs had been permanently pulled. No lasers, no railguns, no thermal scopes. She reached over her shoulder. Her fingers closed around a length of curved, polished wood. An antique, a relic from a time before circuit boards. She strung it with a single, practiced motion, the tension vibrating up her arm. You might think you know how an advanced military handles a primitive threat. I promise you, the truth is far stranger. In Sector 4 Customs Processing, Junior Officer Brenthick stared at the tactical display. The readouts made absolute zero sense. He was new to the occupation forces, but he knew the standard planetary pacification protocols. Step 1 was the deployment of the global electromagnetic and kinetic dampening field. Step 2 was the collection of the pacified human combatants. The field disabled chemical propellants, magnetic accelerators, and energy cells. It was a flawless piece of engineering. Yet 73 highly armored reconnaissance drones had been destroyed in the Northern Preserve over the last 3 hours. Brenthick's upper left eye twitched. He tapped the glass console, pulling up the raw telemetry from the fallen units. Beside his terminal sat a long, curved piece of wood with a synthetic string attached. The retrieval team had tossed it onto his desk earlier, logging it lazily as decorative debris. The alien patrol moved in a tight wedge formation through the dense foliage. They were a mechanized unit, flanked by hovering optic drones that swept the tree line with infrared beams. Their armor was a segmented, hyperdense alloy designed specifically to deflect hypervelocity rounds and plasma burns. Without working human weapons to fear, they weren't even attempting stealth. They crushed undergrowth beneath heavy boots, a loud rhythmic march of absolute authority. High above them, perched on the thick branch of an ancient oak, Petra waited. She pulled a long feathered shaft from the quiver resting at her hip. She didn't have a targeting computer. She didn't have a wind shear calculator. She possessed only muscle memory, built over a decade of silence in these woods. She nocked the arrow. She drew the string back to her cheek. "Recalibrate the sensory logs," Brenthick muttered, his 4 digits flying across the interface. He refused to believe the initial automated reports. The diagnostic scanner on his desk hummed its sterile metallic rhythm, repeatedly returning error CI every time it swept over the wooden curve. It had no power source. It possessed no moving mechanical parts. Therefore, by every law of modern conflict, it was not a weapon. He pulled up the final visual feed from drone 44. The drone had been hovering at 50 meters, scanning the canopy. The dampening field was operating at maximum output. The telemetry confirmed it. Nothing powered could possibly fire. Brenthick leaned closer to the screen. The dampening field should have neutralized all kinetic accelerators. Wait. Why is she reaching over her shoulder? 50 meters downrange, the lead drone swiveled its optical cluster toward the canopy, its mechanical whir echoing in the quiet air. Petra released the string. There was no muzzle flash. There was no sonic boom, just the sharp, terrifying whisper of displaced air. The 80-gram projectile launched at 80 meters per second. 120 joules of kinetic energy concentrated into a hardened steel broadhead the size of a thumb. It struck the drone's primary optic cluster. The alien armor plating, engineered to disperse heat and deflect wide-angle impacts, simply folded inward under the localized pressure. The arrow punched through the synthetic lens, shattered the internal processor, and pinned the spark-showering chassis to the trunk of a pine tree. The patrol halted instantly. They raised their useless rifles, aiming wildly at shadows. Brenthick pushed his chair back. The wheels squeaked loudly against the polished floor, the only sound in the sterile room. He replayed the footage. Quarter speed. The projectile hadn't been fired. It had been pushed. By physical leverage, the human had used her own biological strength to bend a piece of inert matter, storing potential energy and releasing it with enough concentrated force to bypass military-grade shielding. His gills flared. The math scrolled mercilessly down his secondary monitor. Impact force, 120 joules. Targeting vector, manual hand-eye coordination. He looked down at the wooden curve sitting on his desk. It wasn't debris. It was an engine of kinetic transfer, entirely invisible to their security grids, and the human who had wielded it was currently sitting in holding cell 3, waiting to be processed. On the main monitor, the forest slaughter continued. The alien patrol had abandoned their useless rifles, drawing high-frequency vibro blades, but the blades required close quarters. Petra never gave them the chance. She moved like a phantom through the upper branches, her boots finding perfect purchase on wet bark. A second arrow materialized on her string. The draw was fluid, brutal, and entirely silent. She didn't aim with software. She aimed with instinct. Another release. Another hyper-dense armor plate punctured at the exact joint seam where the metal gave way to flexible mesh. The patrol leader collapsed into the ferns, clutching his ruined secondary respiratory valve. The rest of the squad scattered, breaking their tight wedge formation in a desperate bid to find cover from an enemy that made no sound and triggered no thermal alarms. Brenthick's pulse spiked, a heavy, irregular thrumming against his collarbone. He looked away from the slaughter on the screen and stared at the physical weapon resting on his examination table. The sterile metallic hum of the customs officer's diagnostic scanner, repeatedly returning, Eros and Modem Prael felt like a direct insult to his intelligence. How could a piece of unpowered timber dismantle a specialized subjugation squad? He ran the physics simulation again, feeding the raw velocity data into the terminal. An impact force of 120 joules without a chemical propellant or magnetic rail is mathematically a loud crash from the audio feed shattered his concentration. On screen, the occupation forces had finally realized their absolute disadvantage. They stopped hunting the shadows and called in an orbital gravity tether. A sweeping wave of blue kinetic distortion flattened the pine trees, dragging everything within a 2-mile radius toward the soil. Petra hit the forest floor hard. Her breath left her in a violent rush. Half a dozen heavily armored soldiers swarmed her position instantly, pinning her limbs to the dirt. One of them ripped a wooden curve from her grasp. Even then, the victorious soldiers handled the primitive object gingerly, holding it away from their bodies as if expecting it to detonate. They had absolutely no idea what they were holding, only that it had killed their commander, which brought them to the present moment. Brenthick disabled the playback, plunging the room back into silence. The skirmish was over, but the anomaly was sitting just beyond the reinforced blast door of his processing center. The protocol for pacified combatants was straightforward. You catalog their armaments, you log their threat level, and you ship them to the containment colonies. But Brenthick didn't know how to classify a weapon that didn't technically exist on any known technological spectrum. He keyed the intercom, his digits hesitating over the console, and ordered the perimeter guards to bring the prisoner into the interrogation suite. The heavy blast doors slid apart with a pneumatic hiss. 2 towering guards dragged Petra into the room, securing her to the interrogation chair before retreating to the perimeter. She was bruised, her face streaked with dirt and sap, but she remained remarkably calm. Brenthick sat across from her. The wooden object rested on the metal table between them. He tried to project absolute authority. He activated the recording matrix, ensuring the sector command was logging the interview. He pointed a trembling digit at the unpowered, primitive tool. He demanded to know its energy source, its targeting algorithm, and the location of the hidden manufacturing facility that produced such undetectable stealth technology. He demanded to know how her species had bypassed the dampening field to achieve an 80-meter-per-second velocity. Petra leaned forward against her heavy restraints. She looked down at the bow, then up at Brenthick's 4 twitching eyes. A slow, exhausted smile spread across her face. She didn't boast. She didn't scream. "My grandfather used this for deer," she said. The words hung in the sterile air. Brenthick processed the translation. Deer. A non-combatant biological prey species. An animal hunted for sustenance. She raised her bound hands, casually miming the draw and release right there in the chair. The movement was so ingrained, so naturally lethal, that Brenthick's internal combat stims flooded his system. His hyperdense armor plates locked down defensively with a sharp, involuntary click. He felt genuine terror. The security containment grid, designed to withstand localized nuclear detonations and plasma phase shifts, suddenly felt entirely inadequate against a species that could look at a piece of dead flora and a woven string and see an instrument of pinpoint, armor-piercing lethality. They had disabled all of humanity's advanced technology. They had turned off the power. They had stripped away the future. And in response, this human had simply reached into the deep, violent past and brought it forward to slaughter them. The recurve bow no longer sits in the decorative debris bin. It rests inside a maximum security vacuum vault, suspended by magnetic repulsors, in the center of the sector command atrium. The diagnostic scanners still read it as completely inert. The occupation forces walked past it every day, staring at the curved wood,